'cause I think I'm falling in love. I think I'm falling in love.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about 5 signs that you might be ready for a reverse diet. Before I get into everything, I want to quickly simplify what a reverse diet is for those of you who might not know. And really, this isn't like a technical term. I actually think that it was created like the term by Layne Norton many years ago. It had its peak, I want to say, around like 2014, 15. Everybody in the world was reverse dieting. But over time and different fads that have come and gone over the years, it seems like a lot of people are still confused on what a true reverse diet is. Basically, the goal is to slowly, incrementally increase your calories over an extended period of time. Right off the bat, I want to tell you that there is no like set right way to do a reverse diet because everybody's bodies are so different. Everyone's going to have a different metabolism, how long they dieted for, how much fat they lost, how much they're looking to gain, the length of time that they have, you know, so there's no like formula for reverse dieting, but the overall concept is basically once you get to a low calorie amount, whether it was on purpose or not, to get you up to a higher maintenance level, we want to slowly increase those calories over time. For some people, this looks like 50 to 100 calories per week. Someone who's maybe taller, has more muscle mass, they can probably get away with increasing anywhere from like, I've seen 100 to 250, 300 calorie increases per week. It's important to note that there's actually not a lot of studies, data, scientific peer-reviewed research on reverse dieting because the concept is just like a concept, right? Like it's not like a keto study where people take people and subjects and do like a placebo and then keto diet and study them for weeks and no, it's not like that. Like I said, reverse dieting kind of looks different for everybody, even though the general concept is still the same. But it is important to also consider, alongside with there not being a lot of data to support it, there's also a lot of other things that people don't tell you when it comes to reverse dieting, because I see this a lot on social media. People will advertise like a very small human eating, you know, like 3,000 calories a day. Like she's super lean, super jacked. You know, I'm not here to tell people that everybody in the bodybuilding, CrossFit, weightlifting world is on PEDs, but you have to also consider it to some degree. There are certain people who are genetic freaks. There are certain people and certain athletes who compete in untested federations who are, in my opinion, very obviously on gear. And then there's also people who literally just take PEDs, they're not competing and they just do it, but they're also advertising a very unrealistic expectation for reverse dieting. So I do want to point that out. Even though reverse dieting is a lot of marketing towards gaining muscle, but keeping the fat minimal, that's really hard to sell to like the generic public. You know what I mean? Because not everyone is going to gain muscle at the same rate. There's so many different factors to consider. And also you're going to gain some amount of fat when you're putting on muscle. It's unless you're like a very, very new beginner, you've never touched a weight in your life. For the majority of us, it's near impossible to only put on muscle mass when you are increasing your calories. Laws of physics, or I don't know if that's physics, whatever, but you know what I'm saying. It's really, really unlikely. So one of the biggest things that I see happen, especially when someone does go on a diet, a deficit, whatever it is, for an extended period of time, they lose all this weight, they get to their like goal weight, right? And then once they've reached that point, they're like, well, forget it, I'm gonna go back to normal because I've reached my goal weight and I'm done with dieting. But then what happens is they end up putting the weight on super quickly because they just went from an extreme deficit to sometimes an extreme surplus, which you will often see this referred to in the bodybuilding community as rebounding, because they've been so deprived for so long. Then they go the complete opposite end of the spectrum and they unintentionally overeat, or sometimes they do it intentionally, and they end up putting on a lot more body fat than they would have liked, and then the cycle continues. And for regular people who are not athletes, competing bodybuilders, that's what we see a lot of yo-yo dieting. Like someone sticks to a diet for 12 weeks, loses all the weight, eats normally, gains the weight back. And where reverse dieting comes in is instead of going from that yo-yo from severe deficit to severe surplus, we're gonna slowly get there. It may not be a surplus, the goal is obviously maintenance, like I said, but instead of going from one extreme to the other, the ultimate plan with reverse dieting should be slow and steady. Also, this just gives it a more realistic approach, in my opinion. Like, it's much easier to stick to something when you're doing it slowly, consistently, over a long period of time. The problem is that it's just not sexy, right? Like, nobody wants to do those things for a long period of time. A lot of people want to do the extreme diets and cuts because, yeah, they work, they're extreme, right? If you cut in a super, super large amount of calories out of your diet, you're gonna lose weight. But then if you add them back in increasingly quickly, you're gonna gain weight. It is what it is. I wanna also discuss one of the biggest reasons why I think reverse dieting is so beneficial and so easy to stick to for the majority of people. And a lot of that comes down to metabolic adaptation, like what actually makes reverse dieting successful. This is wildly overused, this term, in the fitness and nutrition space, but normally people or coaches will refer to this as starvation mode, which doesn't actually exist. However, the body does have somewhat of a starvation response, and I think people overhype or try to sell the starvation mode in order to get people to reverse diet. And like, I know some of them are coming from a good place and they have kind of the right idea, but starvation is a very real thing. Starvation has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's something that people actually experience. So what happens with dieting, as you go into a caloric deficit over an extended period of time, your body's basal metabolic rate begins to adapt to that amount that you're feeding it. Your basal metabolic rate is the amount of energy that your body uses to survive, like a bare minimum. Not to be confused with your total daily energy expenditure, which encompasses a lot of other factors. Your basal metabolic rate will decline from severely eating in a deficit for a long period of time. And this is because it's your body's way to basically not help you stay alive, but like theologically, yes. Your body wants you to stay alive. That's its main job. So it's actually really fascinating, and the concept is pretty cool. But what happens is, because of that, it's not just that factor, but let's just say someone, you know, has been in a caloric deficit for super, super long. Their overall energy output is going to decline naturally because they have less energy. They're not being fueled enough. You also will then expend less energy when you're exercising because, again, you don't have enough fuel. Those of you who have been in severe diets or extended periods of being in a caloric deficit, you will totally understand the feeling of not being able to give your all in a workout, feeling extremely fatigued. You just don't always feel like you get a good workout in. And that's true. You are not going to be expending the same amount of calories if you were eating at maintenance or in a surplus or just enough before that workout. Now, also, as you get smaller, as you either lose mass, whether that's muscle mass, body fat, your body then by default requires less calories to survive. Your metabolism is basically adapting to make your energy output more efficient. And a lot of times too, just from dieting, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis decreases as well, just because you don't have the energy, right? Like, you're not going on a bunch of walks during the day. You don't have a ton of energy to park your car farther and walk to the, you know, through the parking lot to get to the store. I mean, those are extreme examples, but it is true. You're not going to have the same output as you would not in a deficit. There was a really interesting study. I hope I can find it and link it in the description, but basically there was a study that showed that someone who dieted down, like in a caloric deficit to a certain amount of weight, burned 5 to 15% less calories existing as someone who is the same weight but had always been that weight and didn't diet to reach that weight. And 5 to 15% is a pretty decent amount, especially if you are a smaller human. So all of that to say, the longer that you are in a caloric deficit, in a diet, whatever, the more likely you are to experience the metabolic adaptation, the lower basal metabolic rate, the lower caloric output, and we don't always want that, right? But the good news is that metabolic adaptation works in both ways, which is where reverse dieting comes in. If you increase your calories gradually over time, your metabolism adapts in that same way that it did when it adapted to the lower calorie, and that is called adaptive thermogenesis. When it's done correctly, some really awesome benefits of that: increased basal metabolic rate, increased energy output, increase muscle mass, which is also why, it's a side note, which is also why if you have two people, person A, they're the same exact weight, but person A is significantly more muscular than person B. Person A is gonna burn way more calories just by existing than person B. So there are a lot of really good benefits to spending your time at maintenance, above, slowly increasing if you've been in a deficit, because the overall goal is to be able to maintain your weight at as high amount of calories as possible. This sounds appealing to you. In my opinion, as a nutrition coach, the top 5 reasons why I would suggest someone to enter a reverse dieting phase. Number 1, you have been in a deficit or a severe dieting phase for a long time. Now, in my opinion, a long time is anything over 12 weeks. That's just me. I don't like to personally have my clients cut for longer than 12 weeks. Some people literally cut all year round, and I can't relate. For someone who is chronically dieted, you may want to consider a reverse diet. Number 2, if you are constantly thinking about food, like when is your next meal, when are you going to eat, it's becoming obsessive, you may really benefit from a reverse diet. Obviously, this goes without saying, but I am not a psychiatrist. I'm not giving you eating disorder advice or treatment. If you do suffer with an eating disorder, you should always reach out to a certified, qualified eating disorder specialist, not somebody on Instagram. But with that being said, if you find yourself obsessing over food, you probably need more food. 3, if you're feeling super lethargic, super under recovered, and your performance in the gym tanks, also may be another sign. And this is just because of kind of like what we talked about earlier. Your body's not able to produce as much output as it would if you were properly fed, fueled. And a lot of that just comes from people when they're cutting, obviously they're cutting out a lot of carbs. The body uses carbs as its first source of energy. So when you're eating a super low carb diet, over time, that's gonna affect your performance in the gym. Number 4 is that you've reached your target weight loss, fat loss, body composition goals. And this is why I also don't advise people stay in a deficit, because that just means that that's where you will have to be in order to maintain that weight. Ideally, when you reach your point, you do want to slowly start to increase so that eventually when you go to cut again, you don't have to get as low as you did the first time. So if you just want to kind of switch from going to, you know, dieting body composition goals and switching to performance, always recommend reverse dieting for that. And lastly, this is kind of like piggybacking off of number 1, but if you are plateauing and you feel like you absolutely cannot lose any more weight, you've been dieting, like your body composition is not changing, you are just feeling so frustrated, I would highly recommend to take a break. If a diet break is not working for you, you know, I would just go right into a reverse diet. In my opinion, I feel like there's a time and place for a diet break, but I just don't feel like that's realistic for the majority of people who are simply trying to improve their body composition, because in the long run, you're gonna be better off from increasing your calories over time. So I hope that this answers your question. I get asked about reverse diets all the time. Let me know if you need me to explain anything further. As always, leave me a comment. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and click subscribe so you never miss Monday with Mander. Of course, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video.